The Galactic Empire was a machine of perfection, each piece finely tuned for domination. Its fleets spanned countless systems, its soldiers engineered for precision and power. On the bridge of the Obsidian Sentinel, Grand Marshal Vorix observed the holographic map of the Milky Way. A faint smirk tugged at his lips. Humanity, the fledgling species clinging to its corner of the galaxy, dared to reject the Empire's demand for unconditional surrender. Their audacity amused him. Pathetic, Vorix muttered, his voice a guttural rasp. He waved a clawed hand, dismissing the hologram. Send the First Legion. This farce ends swiftly. Humanity had no legions, no indomitable fleets. Their so-called defenses were a patchwork of outdated ships and barely functional colonies. On paper, they were no more a threat than a fly to a war beast. Yet something lingered in the Marshal's mind, a nagging doubt. The humans had surprised the galaxy before. Their improvisational nature, their maddening refusal to play by established rules, had cost the Empire minor skirmishes in the past. This time, he resolved, they would have no chance. Far from Vorix's pristine warship, Jack Carter grumbled as he wrestled with the stubborn actuator of an old colony ship's life support system. Sweat beaded on his brow as sparks flew, illuminating the cramped maintenance shaft. The ship groaned under its own age, a relic of humanity's desperate push into space centuries ago. Jack was its caretaker, though he'd call himself something less charitable. Piece of junk, Jack growled, tightening his grip on the wrench. The actuator gave way with a shriek, finally submitting to his efforts. There! Fixed. Again. Now, try not to fall apart for a week, all right? Climbing out of the shaft, he wiped his hands on his grease-stained jumpsuit and headed toward the mess hall. The lights flickered as he walked, a constant reminder of the ship's fragile state. He didn't mind the work. It kept him busy, kept him from thinking too much. Jack had never been the type to follow orders. He'd left Earth's military years ago, tired of bureaucracy and leaders more concerned with optics than solutions. Now, as the stalwart Endeavor's mechanic, he answered to no one, except, occasionally, the ship's outdated AI, Daisy. You're late for the captain's address, Daisy's calm voice chimed from a nearby panel. Jack rolled his eyes. And I'm supposed to care, because this time, it might actually be important, Daisy replied, a note of urgency breaking through her usual monotone. The Empire has issued an ultimatum. Jack froze. What kind of ultimatum? Total surrender or annihilation, Daisy said simply. The captain is convening the crew to discuss our options. Jack snorted. Options? What options? They got ships the size of cities. We got a pile of bolts that screams every time I ask it to turn left. Nevertheless, he found himself walking toward the mess hall. When he arrived, the air was heavy with tension. The captain, a weary man named Harris, stood at the center of the room, his holographic projector displaying the Empire's message. The ultimatum's timer ticked ominously. The way I see it, Harris said, his voice strained, we have two choices, fight or flee. Both are suicide, but I'll be damned if we roll over for them. Murmurs of fear and uncertainty rippled through the crew. Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He knew the truth as well as anyone here. Fighting was a death sentence. Running wasn't much better. Humanity's colonies were scattered and vulnerable. They don't care about us, Jack muttered to no one in particular. We're just another box to tick on their conquest list. Daisy's voice broke through his thoughts, her tone quieter now. You always said you wanted a chance to make a difference. Maybe this is it? Jack shot a glare at the nearest panel. You're not seriously suggesting we fight them. With what? My wrench? The idea planted itself stubbornly in his mind. Jack hated it. He hated the odds, the stupidity of even trying. But he hated the Empire more. They'd taken his family in a raid years ago, when he'd been stationed on a border outpost. He'd lived with that rage ever since, burying it under layers of cynicism and grease. All right, Jack said, louder now, pushing off the wall. You want to make a difference? Fine, but we're not doing it their way. The room quieted as eyes turned to him. He felt their disbelief, their desperation, and, to his surprise, a flicker of hope. "We don't fight them head-on," Jack continued. "We can't. But we don't have to. They're ships, they're soldiers. They're built for war, not sabotage. And we've got something they don't." "What?" Harris asked skeptically. Jack lifted his wrench. "Me?" Laughter broke the tension, but Jack's expression remained stone cold. He wasn't joking. "I'm serious," he said. "Give me the Resolute, the cloaking prototype nobody's touched because we're too scared it'll blow up. Let me take the fight to them. One ship, one mechanic. I'll hit them where it hurts, where they won't see it coming." "Jack, that's madness," Harris said. "Maybe," Jack admitted. "But it's better than sitting here, waiting to die." A long silence followed. Harris looked to the crew, then back to Jack. Finally, he nodded, though his face betrayed his doubt. "You've got one chance, Carter," Harris said. "Don't waste it." An hour later, Jack stood in the hangar, staring at the Resolute. It was sleek but untested, its dark hull bristling with experimental tech that made Jack both excited and deeply concerned. Daisy's voice crackled in his earpiece. "You know this is insane, right?" she said. "Yeah," Jack replied, strapping on his toolkit. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the universe hates a smartass with a wrench. Let's see how they handle me." As the Resolute powered up, Jack felt a thrill of determination he hadn't felt in years. The Empire thought humanity was weak, predictable. They were wrong. He wasn't a soldier or a strategist. He was a mechanic, and he was going to make them regret underestimating him. The ship vanished into the void, leaving the crew of the stalwart Endeavor watching in stunned silence. For the first time since the ultimatum arrived, they dared to hope. The Resolute drifted silently through the abyss, cloaked from the Empire's sensors. Inside its cramped cockpit, Jack Carter stared at the faint glow of his navigation console, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and second guesses. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Infiltrate the Empire's flagship, sabotage it from within, and escape before anyone realized what had happened. In practice, Jack knew it was a one-way trip. That was fine. He'd made peace with that fact the moment he'd boarded the ship. Approaching the invincible blade, Daisy's voice announced through the comms. Her calm, automated tone was the only thing keeping Jack grounded. Cloaking system at 98% efficiency. Hull integrity stable. "Good," Jack muttered, his hands tightening on the controls. The flagship loomed ahead, a monstrosity of metal and menace. Its angular hull bristled with weapons, and the glow of its massive engines bathed the surrounding void in an ominous crimson. It was a mobile fortress, the Empire's ultimate symbol of power and fear. The Resolute slipped into the ship's shadow, avoiding the scanning arcs of patrolling fighters. Jack's fingers danced across the console, rerouting power to auxiliary thrusters for precision maneuvering. Sweat trickled down his temple, but his focus never wavered. He'd spent his entire life fixing things. Now, he was about to unfix something in the most spectacular way possible. "Docking bay entrance located," Daisy reported. "Access port E-17 appears to have minimal activity." "Minimal's good," Jack replied. "Let's keep it that way." With a faint hiss, the Resolute latched onto the access port. Jack grabbed his toolkit and stepped into the airlock, his heart pounding. He had no illusions about his chances if he were discovered. The Empire's soldiers were engineered for combat, towering behemoths of muscle and armor. Jack, by contrast, was armed with a wrench, a plasma torch, and a healthy dose of spite. The airlock hissed open, and Jack slipped inside, his boots silent on the metallic floor. The corridor was dimly lit, the hum of machinery filling the air. He tapped into a nearby terminal, overriding the system with a device he'd rigged on the flight over. Blueprints of the ship flooded his display, and he quickly identified his first target, the primary power relay station. The journey was nerve-wracking. Jack moved with calculated precision, ducking into maintenance shafts and shadowy alcoves to avoid patrols. The soldiers he glimpsed were even more intimidating up close, their imposing frames clad in sleek black armor. Jack gritted his teeth, his grip on his wrench tightening. He wasn't here to fight them. He was here to outthink them. Reaching the power relay station, Jack marveled at the scale of the machinery. Rows of glowing conduits pulsed with energy, the lifeblood of the invincible blade. He wasted no time prying open a panel and diving into the circuitry. His fingers worked with practiced speed, rerouting power flows and planting improvised overload modules. Progress? Daisy's voice whispered in his ear. Almost there, Jack muttered. Just need to. A heavy footstep echoed behind him. Jack froze, his pulse skyrocketing. Slowly, he turned to see a hulking soldier standing in the doorway, his crimson visor locked onto Jack. Unauthorized personnel detected. The soldier growled, his voice deep and metallic. He raised his weapon, a menacing plasma rifle that hummed with lethal energy. Jack's mind raced. Fighting wasn't an option. His eyes darted to the control panel he'd been working on. He hit a button, and a surge of energy raced through the conduits. Lights flickered, and the machinery groaned as a controlled cascade of malfunctions rippled outward. The soldier stumbled as the floor beneath him shook. Jack seized the moment, throwing a nearby toolbox at the soldier's head. The distraction worked, barely. Jack dove past him, sprinting into the corridor as alarms began to blare. Daisy, I got company, he panted. Multiple hostiles converging on your location, Daisy replied. Suggest immediate relocation. You don't say, Jack grumbled, ducking into a maintenance hatch. The shaft was cramped and stifling, but it offered temporary cover. He crawled through the narrow space, his ears ringing from the sound of boots pounding the deck above. Emerging in another section of the ship, Jack quickly assessed his surroundings. The sabotage had done its job. Sections of the ship were now experiencing localized power failures, sowing confusion among the crew. Jack smiled grimly. The Empire might have the strongest warriors, but their dependence on flawless systems was a weakness he intended to exploit. His next target was the ship's central communication hub. Jack knew he couldn't destroy the invincible blade outright, not with the tools he had. But if he could disrupt its coordination with the rest of the fleet, it would be a critical blow. The hub was heavily guarded, but Jack had a plan. He activated a maintenance drone he'd reprogrammed earlier, sending it trundling down the corridor. The guards watched it warily as it approached, its cheerful beeping masking the explosive charge hidden inside. The explosion was controlled but effective, knocking the guards off their feet. Jack rushed in, disabling the survivors with quick strikes of his wrench. He winced at the effort. His arms ached, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Daisy, patch me into the hub systems, Jack said, plugging his device into the central console. Working on it, Daisy replied. You've got approximately 3 minutes before reinforcements arrive. Plenty of time, Jack lied, his fingers flying across the interface. He uploaded a virus designed to scramble the flagship's communication frequencies, rendering it blind and deaf to its fleet. As the virus took effect, the lights flickered again, and the console sparked. Jack grinned, but his victory was short-lived. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, reinforcements, and lots of them. Jack grabbed his tools and bolted, adrenaline propelling him forward. He had one final objective, the engine core. If he could sabotage it, the invincible blade would be dead in space. But the soldiers were closing in, their shouts growing louder. He ducked into another maintenance shaft, narrowly avoiding a hail of plasma bolts. His lungs burned, and his legs felt like lead, but he refused to stop. He couldn't. Emerging near the engine core, Jack marveled at the colossal reactor pulsing with energy. This was it, the heart of the beast. He set to work, planting the last of his overload modules. The core groaned as its systems struggled to compensate. Jack's comm crackled. Hostiles are breaching your location, Daisy warned. Figures, Jack muttered. He stood, wrench in hand, and faced the doorway as the first soldier entered. The corridor erupted into chaos. Jack fought with everything he had, using his tools and the environment to stay alive. He wasn't a warrior, but he was stubborn, and his determination was a force to be reckoned with. When the last soldier fell, Jack collapsed against the reactor, panting. The modules were in place, and the core was seconds away from a catastrophic failure. Jack smiled weakly. Daisy, prep the Resolute for extraction, he said. The ship's engines roared to life as the flagship's alarms reached a deafening crescendo. Jack sprinted toward his escape, the path ahead fraught with danger, but lit by the fire of defiance. The Resolute screamed through the maintenance corridor as Jack hurtled toward the docking point, his boots slamming against the grated floor. Behind him, the muffled booms of the Invincible Blade's reactor alarms reverberated through the walls, signaling the inevitable. Sparks rained down from flickering ceiling panels, and the entire ship seemed to groan in protest. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to move faster. Cloaking system engaged. Daisy's voice cut through the chaos in his earpiece. The Resolute is ready for immediate extraction. Good, Jack muttered between breaths, gritting his teeth as another shudder rocked the corridor. The Empire's engineers had designed their flagship to withstand anything, except a determined human with a bag of tools and a vendetta. He reached the access port and slammed his hand on the control panel. The hatch hissed open, revealing the Resolute's airlock. Climbing inside, Jack didn't waste a second. He threw himself into the pilot's seat, his hands flying across the controls. The ship powered up with a low hum, its engines ready to propel him out of harm's way. Outside the viewport, the Invincible Blade loomed like a dying titan, its vast hull shuddering under the strain of Jack's sabotage. Releasing docking clamps, Daisy announced. The Resolute shot away from the access port, its cloaking system rendering it invisible to the flagship's sensors. Jack exhaled sharply, allowing himself a fleeting moment of relief. He'd done it, or at least he thought he had. The core would fail any second now, and the Invincible Blade would be reduced to a lifeless hulk. But the moment didn't last. Jack, Daisy said, her tone uncharacteristically urgent. I'm detecting a critical malfunction in the overload modules. The chain reaction is incomplete. Jack's stomach sank. What do you mean incomplete? The core is destabilizing, but it won't reach critical failure. The flagship's emergency systems are compensating faster than anticipated. He slammed his fist against the console, his mind racing. If the Invincible Blade survived, the Empire's fleet would regroup, and humanity's slim chance at survival would evaporate. Jack's eyes darted to the reactor diagnostics Daisy had pulled up on the display. The problem was clear, as was the solution. He leaned back in his seat, staring at the data. Daisy, if I redirect the remaining power from the Resolute into the flagship's core, it would force the chain reaction to completion, Daisy finished for him. But it would destroy this ship in the process. Jack let out a hollow laugh, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. Of course it would. Can't make anything easy, can we? Silence filled the cockpit, broken only by the hum of the Resolute's engines. Jack could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He thought of the crew back on the stalwart Endeavor, of the scattered colonies relying on anyone, to stand up to the Empire. He thought of his family, lost years ago in a border raid. Their faces burned into his memory. Daisy, he said finally, his voice steady. Transfer all remaining power to the core destabilizers. Set the Resolute on a collision course with the reactor. Understood, Daisy replied. There was no hesitation in her voice, no argument. Jack began the sequence, his hands moving with purpose. As the ship systems transferred their remaining energy, the cockpit lights dimmed, leaving only the faint glow of the viewport. He felt the Resolute shudder as its engines adjusted course, locking onto the reactor deep within the Invincible Blade. Final trajectory confirmed, Daisy said. Impact in 60 seconds. Jack leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. Guess this is it, huh? You've exceeded all operational expectations, Daisy said softly. It has been an honor. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. Honor, huh? Never thought I'd hear that from you. Thanks, Daisy. The viewport filled with the brilliant light of the reactor as the Resolute closed in. Jack watched it with a strange sense of calm. He'd spent most of his life fixing broken things. Now he was about to break something so big, so powerful, that it would shake the galaxy to its core. The final seconds ticked away. Jack closed his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. Somewhere out there, humanity still had a fighting chance. That was enough. The Resolute struck the reactor with pinpoint precision. For a moment, there was silence, as if the universe itself held its breath. Then, the invincible blade erupted in a blinding wave of energy, its vast hull disintegrating in an instant. The shock wave rippled outward, scattering the Empire's fleet like leaves in a storm. On the stalwart Endeavor, Captain Harris and his crew watched the explosion from their battered bridge. The sight was both terrifying and beautiful, a testament to one man's defiance against impossible odds. "Did he make it?" one of the crew whispered, their voice barely audible. Harris shook his head slowly, his expression a mix of awe and grief. "He gave us everything." In the weeks that followed, the story of Jack Carter spread across humanity's colonies. He became a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even the smallest spark could ignite a fire. Statues were erected in his honor, depicting him with his wrench held high, his expression one of unyielding determination. The Empire, reeling from the loss of its flagship, withdrew to its core systems to regroup. For the first time in generations, humanity had breathing room, a chance to rebuild, to unite. And though Jack was gone, his spirit lived on in every act of defiance, every moment of ingenuity. Far away, amidst the wreckage of the invincible blade, a small maintenance drone powered on, its circuits sparking faintly. Inside its memory core, a fragment of data flickered, a recording of Jack's final moments, his voice calm and steady. "If you're hearing this," he said, "it means I did my job. Now it's your turn. Don't waste it." The message ended, but the legacy endured. Humanity wasn't just surviving. It was fighting back one wrench at a time,